Okay, I guess I will then. So, hi everybody, this is Elin Waring. As you know, I'm one of the people who's helping to organize Google Summer of Code this summer for Joomla, and we've been doing these webinars to try to just get people up to speed on Joomla and contributing to Joomla and various aspects of the Joomla project, and I hope that we're doing well with that. And if you do have suggestions about other topics you'd like us to cover, that would be great. We'd be very happy to hear that, you know, because we're trying to make this a good experience for everybody this summer, mentors, students, and the Joomla project. So, as my topic, what we thought I would do is talk about not so much about code or about tools and infrastructure, but just about Joomla as a project, what about open source, about the Joomla community, and a few legal things that you should know about. So here we go. So first of all, I just wanted to talk a bit about what is it that we mean by open source. The Summer of Code is it's a floss-oriented program that Google runs, and they're a big supporter of open source software. But what does this actually mean? So the operational definition of open source software isn't anything about how much software costs. It isn't anything about really a development process. It's not really anything about organization. It's about 4 basic freedoms that people have with software, with code. And that is the freedom to run code, the freedom to study code, to share code, and to modify code. And these are really important because actually with the proprietary software, a lot of times you don't have those rights. You don't have the right just to run any software that you find. You have to follow the terms of use that they give to you. You have to use it. You might be restricted in how you can use it or how many people can use it. You often aren't allowed to look at the code or to study it, to learn from it. And one reason that open source software is so good for students is they do get to study code and see hopefully many examples of great code, but also maybe some examples of not so great code, and learn from it. And I think that's actually one of the most important reasons that open source software produces better software most of the time, is because you do have that chance to study and learn from the work of others. Sharing, of course, you know, we don't have limitations on how many people can have copies of your software. You can pass it along to friends and family and neighbors. As Richard Stallman, who kind of invented the idea of open source software, would call it, he talked about neighbors as one of your important audiences for sharing, and to modify. So you have a right to modify software, and you have a right to then share your modifications of the software. So this makes it, again, really different than other kinds of software. Those are the 4 essential pieces of the general concept of open source software. And it's really, open source software runs a lot of the world these days. So it's pretty, and that's because it has these powerful features. Now, Joomla is in addition to being in the general open source family, it uses a software license called the GPL, the General Public License. And what's a license? That is something really confusing to people, but a license is basically the terms of use that you are given for the software. It's not the same thing as terms of use in the sense of proprietary software that you can only use it in this way or that way, but it's basically governing what you can do with it. And in the case of the GPL, it says the terms of use are that you have these 4 freedoms. But in addition, it says that you must pass these freedoms on to others. So if you do take advantage of the share freedom, you can't share and say to the people you're sharing with that you're not allowed to share. So you have to pass those freedoms on to others. And that's why sometimes they talk about the GPL as a viral license because it means that it's spreading all the time. You can't stop the GPL. It's because it's required that you pass these freedoms along to other people. So you can't take GPL code and put it into proprietary software. That's the short version of the GPL, and why the GPL is also considered, actually, it's the most free license in the sense of enforcing freedom, but it's also a restrictive license because of the enforcement of freedom. There's other open source licenses where you are allowed to put the code into proprietary software, but not the GPL. That's an important thing to understand. Now, you as developers, it's very important that you understand how your code is licensed and that you understand the implications of different licenses, and when you put a license in the header files of your code, what that means. So I just told you what it means if you put the GPL in the header of your license. You're saying to the people who receive copies of this software that you wrote that they have these 4 freedoms, and that if they pass the software on to others, they also have to pass along those 4 freedoms. Now, I do want to say that it's important for computer science students and IT students and informatics students to understand licensing. It's really important that you don't sign licensing agreements if you don't understand what they mean, that you ask questions about them. Make sure you understand the status of your code, and don't assume that because you haven't signed anything you control your code, because actually sometimes not signing something means that you've given the control of your code to somebody else. So it's just really important for you to understand what you're doing when you license code and when you share code. Because if you don't make your code GPL, for example, people can put it into proprietary software, and you may be fine with that, and that's fine if you are. If you do work for hire, you actually don't control your own code in the United States anyway. So there's a lot of legal things that I'm not a lawyer, but I've talked to a lot of lawyers about, and it's important for you as developers to understand what's happening with your code and to protect your code and keep track of what's happening with your code. So that said, everybody should by now have signed the Joomla contributor agreement, and we should be, I hope that's true, and the Joomla contributor agreement is kind of unusual in terms of a contributor agreement, or what they sometimes call contributor licensing agreement, in this open source software, where it's a very, very developer friendly Joomla. You don't turn over your copyright to the code. You keep the copyright to your own code and keep total control of your own code, which is different than on the vast majority of other open source projects. So you have total ownership, and actually, even though you're giving Open Source Matters, which is the nonprofit for Joomla, even though you're contributing your code under the GPL, if your code is really totally original code, you actually can also distribute that code under a different license. It wouldn't be part of Joomla because Joomla is only the GPL. But if you are writing like a library and you're not using any Joomla in that library, you're totally free to distribute that code in a non-GPL format. You can put it into a proprietary application. You can put it into another open source license. So that's why we say the Joomla contributor agreement is very developer friendly, because it keeps you in total control of it. And basically, if you did sign it and didn't read it, I'll tell you what the highlights are. The 3 things are: 1, you still control your code. You retain copyright on your code. And if you check the box, then OSM also has a joint copyright, but it's like 2 separate copyrights, because OSM can, and the future developers in Joomla can change that code in all kinds of ways, and you might take the same code and take it off in a different direction. So it's like there's 2 copyright trees going on, but you still have complete copyright on your code. and ownership of your code. And basically the reason we have a contributor agreement, it's because what happens if there is ever a problem with the license? So, for example, we have had situations in the past where Joomla, GPL Joomla code has been incorporated into proprietary applications contrary to the license. And so we had to have the OSM had to have their lawyers talk to these proprietary applications, and they had to remove that code. And they were fine with that, but that basically is called OSM having to defend the license. So if, in theory, if there was a really bad situation where OSM had to go to court and it was partly your code that was in question, and what if it's 5, 10 years from now and we can't find you anymore, we'd have to kind of get you to agree that we can take that code to court, defend the code in court. This way, by signing the JCA, everybody is covered, and OSM doesn't have to worry about keeping track of you for the rest of your life, although we hope you'll be around Joomla for the rest of your life. So the second thing I wanted to talk about is a little bit less, it's less legal and more practical in terms of what does it take to get your code into the Joomla repositories. And I think this is one of the big things we're going to be focusing on this summer. We've really tried to pick projects that we think have a good chance of ending up being in the core repositories, either of the CMS or of the platform, and being really useful too. And but it hasn't always been the case that that's happened from Summer of Code. So I just want to talk about, like, what's that process like? How is it that some code ends up eventually getting put into one or the other of these repositories? It's not easy. As I said at first, it's not always easy, but I would say especially if it's a bug fix, that's pretty not bad. But if it's new code, either a new class or even a new method or a new feature in the CMS, that can be a lot more challenging. And it's easier than it used to be. When I first started with Joomla, it was very, very hard for anybody who wasn't on the core development team to get any code into the Joomla repositories, and now it's become a lot friendlier and happier and open in terms of code contributions. But it's still challenging, and that's because Joomla is a big worldwide project with millions of users, and the code standards are really high. Stuff has to work. It has to work in a way that's unimaginable in terms of how users will push it and shove it and turn it around in all kinds of directions. So it's very, very important that code that gets in be very, very good and very polished. Now, what does that mean? It means, in fact, a lot of times at the end of the summer, you're going to have a big pile of code there, and it may not be quite ready even to be a pull request into the main repository. And that's fine, because it takes a long time to write good code. So it's kind of like, I also teach writing, and I say writing code is just like writing a novel. You write it, and then you edit it, and you revise it, and you revise it again, and you get criticism, and you fix it up, and that's what makes it great. It's not easy to write something great, but that's what we want in the platform and in the CMS is great code. So we have to be really ready to work hard to get the code in. So if you look at some recent examples, and I would say, I'm going to be honest and say, if you look at the Joomla repository, you actually see that there's many, many contributors to Joomla, but they're mainly contributors of small pieces of code, a method, an improvement, developing an API in a more advanced way. But there's very few, a relatively small number of people who have contributed a package or even a class. And if you look at some of the most recent commits of classes, you'll see why. It's extremely, these are the standards that code contributions really have to live up to, and these are the professional standards that we're looking for. So the most recent things I'd really call your attention to are the new MVC classes, which is a set of classes to implement the new MVC structure, and I think everybody's read a lot about that in recent weeks. And JGitHub is another good example that's more, you can draw a circle around it more. It has kind of less broad impact on everything everybody's doing. But both of those commits have a lot in common. They're great code. They're really clean, well-written, high-performance code. Extremely well documented. They have doc books. They have great comments. They have really good doc blocks. The code style is meticulously clean. It completely follows all the code standards that are out there and that we all have been practicing with for the past few weeks with CodeSniffer. And they all have 85% or more test coverage. And test coverage, it's like, what do those percentages mean? It's always a little bit tricky because there's this percentage, and sometimes it's a percentage of lines that are covered, and sometimes it's a percentage of methods that are completely covered, and sometimes it's the percentage of classes that are completely covered. And so it's a little vague, but I think the 85%, we more or less use lines covered as the metric that we're using. So that's how you should think about it. And I think we really want to have test-focused development. It's not, there's a lot of different computer science software development methodologies with tests, but there's one model called test-driven development where you write the tests first and then make sure you build out to the tests. There's other ones that are more iterative. It doesn't really matter which approach you use. The main thing is, though, that you do need to build tests as you go. It's how you make sure that you're delivering something that really does what it says it does. And everybody will feel a lot more confident about your code doing that if you have a high percentage of test coverage. So those are some of the formal things that everybody will tell you about how to get your code into the repositories. But there's also what I would call the informal rules or the unwritten rules of Joomla code. And this is pretty normal. We do have a project culture, and this is, some of you know that I'm a sociologist, I'm a sociology professor in my day job, and this is very much a sociological concept, but there's an idea of corporate culture, organizational culture, and that's basically the unofficial rules, the way things get done around here, or the assumptions that we make in our patterns and practices and our beliefs about how things should work. And it's really important to understand those informal things as well as understanding the formal rules. So I'm going to give you some of, this is totally my opinionated observations about how the Joomla community works. Number one is that, Joomla's object-oriented software, and we are definitely, in terms of organizational culture, we are not a procedural organization, a procedural community. We don't have, every time we try to write down a bunch of rules, they immediately get totally ignored. So it's not even worth it to write down a lot of written rules. But we are much more, and that can be frustrating for people because it does sometimes seem like things are unpredictable and inconsistent, but actually things are very predictable and consistent. It's just that that we have patterns and conventions, not rules. And you see that in the code, and you see that in the community. So we just have patterns of behavior that we use, patterns of participating, of contributing code, of getting feedback, of posting on the mailing list, of talking to each other. We have conventions in terms of what code should look like and how to communicate about it and how to work with other people on your code. And I think it's just good to be an observer and notice how other people are interacting with each other and follow those same kind of rules. So some of the ones that I would say a lot of, and this is true in all open source projects where you have a lot of volunteers or a lot of people who are doing this as part of their work, but they don't have 40 hours a week to, you're lucky that you do have a full-time this summer working on open source and on Joomla, but most people aren't. And so it's just good to be aware of these things. One is, as I said, you have to be patient and persistent in terms of getting your code in. So if you look at the Postgres library that's now out in 12.1 of the platform, it took so long for Gabriel to get that committed, and he went through many, many iterations. He had to, and I think the JDatabase package was refactored at least twice completely during the course of this, and he had to move all his stuff around and recomply with all the new patterns that were there. And he just, what was great about that process was he just kept plugging away at it. He just kept doing it. And the same was true actually for the Microsoft as well. But Gabriel was really like one person doing this, and it's so exciting to have that library in there. And we see people all the time now that are posting issue reports having to do with using Postgres in different settings, like in the CMS where it's not even supported yet. But it does show you that when code gets committed, people are out there using it the day that it gets committed. So I just really think if you look at the history of that, of how long people talked about wanting that feature, and then how long he just had to keep working and keep working and keep working at it, and talk to people about the tests, and talk to people about the structure, and what to do with PDO, and lots of other things that came up along the over a year and a half that the process took, it really did end up making the code better. And it ended up actually pushing JDatabase in a lot of ways too, because all this activity around supporting additional databases really encouraged the core classes to be improved dramatically. So it's just good, but you have to be patient, you have to be persistent, and you have to not get discouraged. It will be discouraging at times, but you have to pick yourself up from that and go on and keep plugging away at it. It's really important to be polite and pleasant on list and not get into arguments with people. It's important to respect people's time. Like, one thing that's really frustrating about the Joomla community is that sometimes it takes forever to get feedback on the mailing list. Sometimes you never get an answer on the mailing list, and it's a lot less active than some projects that have maybe 200 committers. And so you just have to be patient and understand that everybody has a lot of things that they're doing, and a lot of things that they're doing, personally, but also even for the project that we don't necessarily see in public. So just have to be patient and wait. I know a lot of you have pull requests in the platform and and some of them have been there for a month or more, and a lot of them have had some feedback, but some of them are still just waiting for feedback even. And it's not that people aren't paying attention, it's just that there's a lot to do in this project, and people have limited time, and they want to do the things that they want to do too. So we have to make sure that we respect people's desire to have their own fun doing Joomla. Definitely try not to cause headaches by getting into conflicts with people. And we have a lot going on in the summer of code projects in the platform, and so we want to make sure that all the pieces are going to work together. And we already have talked a little bit on the CMS side because we have 2 different language projects, and making sure that the 2 language projects work together well. And so it's just, if we can be cooperative and not cause headaches for people and not make things difficult, that is just, if you get that aura of positiveness around your contributions, that will really help you in terms of being able to get your contributions in. Building consensus. If you have something that you're not sure about and you're not sure if people want, it's really good, rather than to get into an argument about it, to just kind of almost ask the question, ask for feedback. If you have a point of view, make your best case, but listen to what other people are saying, because most of the time, even if you really think they're wrong, you'll find out there's a grain of something there when someone disagrees with you, and you need to pay attention to it. And definitely be doers, not talkers. It's really frustrating in the project when there's people who have the mysterious someone needs to do something, and that's being a talker, as opposed to saying, well, someone needs to do something, I'll take a crack at it. And it doesn't mean that you're going to finish it, but at least to start it. So Eric Raymond, who's one of the big founders of open source, along with Richard Stallman, they were all part of the same group at the beginning, and he wrote an essay, a famous essay, where he talked about open source development is a gift culture, and the short version of that is it means that the more you give, the more code you write, but the more kinds of contributions you make, the more credit you get in the community and the better your reputation. And that's why being a good community member and a good participant and contributor just all the time is really one of the very best ways to get people to pay attention to your code and to take your code seriously and to think that you're going to be worthwhile as a contributor. So I would definitely engage in this gift culture, and don't just think about your own libraries and extensions, but think about other things that you can do, like fixing bugs, cleaning code, giving feedback, writing documents, and all the things a lot of people have been doing during the community bonding period. But I just really, if you go and look at the places where there's tracking of who has the biggest code contributions, you will find that the biggest code contributors, they write, Lewis and Andrew especially, write massive amounts of original code, but they're also people who, they're our most senior developers. They spend insane amount of time on code cleaning and working on the doc blocks and making sure that the code is usable and working on infrastructure and doing code review. So everybody, it doesn't matter how senior you are or how junior you are, needs to participate in doing all that work. No one is really too important to do work like fixing up, like I did this morning, a spelling mistake in a comment. And you need to, it's just part of being a good contributor and part of being a giver and caring about and showing that you care about the project. So I'd really encourage engagement with that kind of work, as well as with writing your library. And there's nothing better in terms of learning Joomla than doing some of that work. I learned a tremendous amount by spending a month and a half last summer working on cleaning the doc blocks, and I went through APIs that I had never looked at before, and it was, very, very useful to me, actually. So it's worthwhile for you, as well as being a good contribution to the community. And then the last thing I want to say is just, think long-term. Think about, we want to think of you as long-term contributors to Joomla, as people who are going to be around for the future. And so, even if your code isn't going to get it maybe will, but even if all of your code doesn't get immediately committed in August, think of yourself as someone who's going to be around and who's going to keep working on both that code and other things in order to help Joomla do really well and be great software. And really feel, if you start to feel invested in the success of the platform and the CMS, then that's a great way to also get your, become a contributor and get your code committed, but also just to feel good about it. So that's my message for today about how to contribute to Joomla. So does anybody have questions they want to ask me about contributing to Joomla? I'm just going to make this public. Hello?
Oh, hi, Javier.
Hi. Great.
It's much more faster if I speak it.
Yes.
I see that there's no many questions, but what you said, it was very, very interesting. I would like to, due to your knowledge and your participation in the project, could you maybe add some historical background about the people that are contributing more in the platform, like, okay, this person is more working on this area, this other one. I know there are many, many people, but just to have a first view of everybody that is there in the community contributing a lot.
Sure, and I think it's changed a lot because now that we have the platform project, there's a little more separation there. So, you know, what happened is that originally, way back in, you know, originally Joomla started from the software package called Mambo, and some of those same, you know, Andrew Eddy, who's platform maintainer now, was one of the original people who really took the lead when Mambo became an open source project in terms of fixing that up and making it into great software. And then Joomla was formed as a fork of the Mambo project. And so what happened is when they started that, and a lot of those people are still around. I mean, I wasn't on the, you know, in the core or anything like that, but a lot of users were, like me, were still around, but also Andrew and Jean-Marie and Chris Davenport and Louis, and, you know, a lot of those people have, and I'm, you know, I'm certainly leaving people out, but they've been around for a long time. And part of what they were doing at the time of the fork was really saying they wanted to separate out the platform from the CMS, because the CMS is built on the platform, but the platform is kind of the libraries that support the CMS, but then also potentially support many other applications. So basically, I'll be on. Again, this is my informal discussion. It's not the official story. But you know what happens is a lot of times if you have these people who are senior developers, like Andrew, you know, spent a long time creating the CMS, writing this great code. Louis did. Rob did. They really, at a certain point, the CMS stops being such an interesting project to them because it's basically mature software. So it's not, and no one would say right now at CMS 2.5 is cutting edge software. It just isn't. That's why it's got millions of users, because it's reliable, it's solid. But for developers like that, they actually, that's not so fun to work on. What's fun for them to work on is the cutting edge. And so that's why we kind of split off the platform project, and a lot of the senior developer people are over mainly working on the platform side, because that's where they can do really interesting creative things and work at that most abstract level. So some of the cast, Javier, you want me to kind of go through the cast of characters? Is that what you want? Do you think?
Yes, please. Yes,
okay.
please.
So over in the platform side, we have the maintainers, who are Louis and Andrew and Rob and Ian and Sam and Christophe, and I'm probably leaving someone else. Oh, Rovin, and I think that's it. I'm probably leaving somebody else out. And so those are people who, well, the first five that I mentioned basically only work on the platform. They really kind of want to work on libraries and to work on this vision of the platform as this extremely powerful framework for development. And we, that will eventually rule the PHP world, and be a competitor for platforms such as Zend and Symfony and CodeIgniter. So that's where we see the platform going, and the people who work on writing those big libraries, which is where a lot of the students are doing this summer, are really writing not just for the CMS, but they're writing with this bigger idea that we can have libraries that will work for many different applications. And some of them, they could be anything. And I guess, you probably know that a bunch of those people work at eBay, but most of them don't. And there's a reason that they do work at high-tech companies, which is that they're very, very experienced and highly skilled developers. And I do want to say for students, on the whole, if you post to the platform mailing list, those people do try to answer as they can. They're working really hard on various projects and their own projects, but they do try to answer questions. And a couple of them, well, Andrew's mentoring this summer, and I think Ian's going to do a webinar about testing, and they do try to talk and be engaged as much as they can, and they will talk to you as much as they can. But this is where the respect their time comes into play, which is that they have full-time jobs and they're working on Joomla for fun too. So. So that's the cast of, and then over in the platform also there's a lot of other people like me and Michael and others who aren't maintainers, but we write various things for the platforms. We fix bugs, but we also, Michael's been doing some incredible work with just going deep into some of the APIs and improving them, and like I've done a lot of stuff with the documentation and some things in JForm, and there's a big cast of characters of people who are kind of active contributors to the platform, and I think it's a really fun place to work because it's a little less stressful than the CMS. The CMS, so on the other side we have the CMS, which is an application built on the platform, content management system. And so Mark Dexter and Christophe Demko and Jean-Marie are the, Jean-Marie Simonet are the committers for the CMS, and they help to kind of make sure that the code that goes into the CMS is solid. And in the CMS, as most of you know, we're at version 2.5, and in September we'll be releasing version 3.0. And we just actually had some recent announcements about things that are happening with 3.0, like the inclusion of the Bootstrap framework for design and usability. And there's many people that contribute to the CMS, and just so you know, there's kind of we act like there's two different groups. It's not totally true, but we talk about the bug squad and we talk about the CMS developers. So the bug squad is people who are just all the time in there fixing bugs, working in the CMS tracker, improving the CMS. And CMS developers are people who write new features for the CMS. And the truth is most people who are active do both. But the CMS features is like what Javier and Lucas are doing this summer, is writing new features for the new, well, in Javier's case, it'll be a new core part of this, a feature of the core CMS. In Lucas's case, an extension for the CMS. So that's, those are things that are handled differently than handling bugs. So there's a feature tracker where they get posted and people test them. But on the CMS, the reason why I said the CMS is stressful is it does have millions of users, millions of end users. So the platform, the end users are other developers. And basically, if a developer is using your package or your library and they find a mistake, they actually usually know how to talk about it, and they can put in often a pull request to make the corrections because they're developers, so they know what they're doing. Whereas on the CMS side, your end users, there are millions of them. They range from, very beginner webmasters to extension developers, right? So it's a huge range. There's been literally about 1 million downloads a month of the CMS right now, and maybe 5 weeks. So that just tells you it's a lot of users, and that means it's a lot of pressure to have code that is really polished and ready to go and that works out of the box without causing trouble. And we're not always successful at doing that, but we're pretty good at doing that. And so it's a little confusing in the community sometimes because we have different mailing lists for all these groups. So I know everybody in Summer of Code is on the Summer of Code mailing list, but you should also probably be on the other mailing list, which is the platform mailing list, the CMS mailing list, and the Bug Squad mailing list. The Bug Squad mailing list is much more of a working list because the Bug Squad is doing code all the time. But there's a lot of good discussions there about how code should work. And then there's also the general development mailing list, and that's actually important too for a lot of you because general development is a mailing list for extension developers and custom developers on the Joomla platform. So it's not a mailing list for webmasters, it's a mailing list for developers on the CMS platform for the most part. And I guess now, more and more, there might be people who are just developing straight on the platform. But I would say the vast majority of them are developing on the CMS platform. So the CMS is a platform on top of the Joomla platform. And so if you're writing platform live packages, or if you're writing for the CMS itself, those are part of your target audience. So that's important. And there's a lot of working groups in Joomla. First off, there's 3 big clusters. There's the production working group, which Summer of Code is really part of because production is really about development and documentation. There's the community working group, which runs all the websites and tries to keep us all in a happy, civil, functioning community, communicating well with each other. And there's Open Source Matters, and Javier is also on the board of Open Source Matters that takes care of the back end stuff of Joomla, like making sure that the trademark is taken care of and that the bills get paid and that OSM's the official applicant, the official participant for Summer of Code, and all the kind of legal stuff, licensing, is Open Source Matters purview. And so those 3 teams, those 3 leadership groups work together to manage the Joomla project. And then within them, there's different subgroups. And so just within development, there's the CMS group and there's the platform group. And there's a bunch of smaller working groups that are working on specific projects that people might be interested in. I know Andy Tar has been posting some about these different working groups because with the summit that's happening next week, we'll be having meetings talking about unified content, talking about search, talking about messaging, a lot of different topics that people have. So, and I forgot translation. Translation is like one of the really important parts of it's a part of the production working group, the actual mechanics, but of course, Joomla is this huge worldwide community, so language issues are really important for us, and there's a very strong commitment to being respectful and welcoming and supporting multilingual features within the software, so in the community. All right, I think that's my overview. Is that enough of that, Javier?
Yes, thank you.
And I've been in all three, so I can speak about. Any other questions, comments?
If there's no more questions, I have one more question. Maybe
Okay.
it's not totally related to the topic, but I think it could be interesting for other students. I was asked it, I think last week, like how can I explain the Joomla platform like in the market again, in front of other frameworks? Could you maybe help us to answer that question?
Like why you would use the Joomla platform versus CodeIgniter or Zend, for example? Yeah, I think I think that's the question that we have to be able to answer, actually. And I was just 2 nights ago looking at the websites of all those competing platforms and thinking they have really good paragraphs that explain this. So I would say right now, the reason that you would use the Joomla platform rather than some of these other platforms is, number one, it's totally object oriented. It's coherent code. It makes sense. It has strong conventions. The new MVC it actually makes it really nice for rapid application development, but also for very powerful application development. Now, we do need to have more examples of that so people understand how to use it. And so I think that's one of my goals for the summer, is to have some more not just the hello world applications, but some real meaty applications that show how to use the Joomla platform. But I think the fact that it's totally object oriented, this is interesting. So they've made in the platform, there's this decision was made to be PHP 5.3 or higher, and it's really challenging to decide that because you are cutting off supporting some older systems. But actually there's a lot of advantages to being PHP 5.3 or higher, which means that the code's taking advantage of a lot of that. So if you're building something totally new, I think that's a good thing. I think the code, I personally haven't used a lot of these other frameworks, but from what people have showed me in terms of what they're using, the Joomla platform is just really, it does what they do, but just so flexibly. And the truth is, and even though, the platform developers really are into building new applications, the truth is you have the world's most successful content management system, open source content management system built on this platform. It's got millions of installations. It's got thousands and thousands and thousands of distributed extensions built on it. It's got thousands and thousands of more custom extensions that we've never seen built on it. And this is a platform that has been used really as much as any other platform. The experience and the pushing that the CMS, the workout that the CMS gives to the Joomla platform is unlike anything any other platform gets. So that's why it's such a solid platform. And in fact, I would say that the CMS, it still relies on some of the older libraries of the platform because they're doing all this new exciting work, but those libraries are great libraries. Even though they're not the cutting edge, they're solid and they work really well. So I just think, since we separated, and we have the ACL, we have cache, we have the transport library is really good. They're just really, because it's both got a lot of experience because of this use by the CMS, but because there's a lot of new code coming out, it's really forward-looking. So it's really focused on things like web services. It's focused on what do we need to meet really high demand. This kind of workout that they get at eBay, where they have so many transactions, it's insane that, you know, there's very few platforms that really can make those claims. As I said, I was looking at their websites the other day, and the examples that they were showing of how their platforms are used were, you know, in a lot of cases, a lot smaller than the examples that we would show. Like, we even have, way back to the 1.5 platform, we had Quizilla and People Browser that were built on them. So we have a lot of experience, even though it was not distributed as a separate entity. We have a lot of experience and a lot of use of these libraries. That'd be my sales pitch.
Thank you. I took my notes.
No, and if you guys want to work on that as a project, making a website for the platform, I think we should do it. Or we should do it on the development site or something like that, because I looked at this Symphony site, and I looked at the Zend site, and I noticed that Zend had a Google library, Google Data Library, and I was like, hey, that's one of our Summer of Code projects. So we're going to be super competitive with them. So that's where I see us going. I think that's where that team is really, like, they have big dreams about this, about really just being able to become the platform. They're thinking big, and it's more than, I mean, it's not just dreams, it's really practical too, because it's really solid code. And it's code that everybody seems to be enjoying writing, and that's really important too, because open source, one of the things about open source projects that everybody says is that they need to be fun to work on. And fun doesn't necessarily mean easy or like, you know, going to an amusement park. Fun can be like working on a puzzle or reading a great book, and be challenging. Fun can, you know, really challenging things can be fun, and that's where the platform is right now. Any more questions, Javier, or anybody else?
Not from my side by now.
Okay. And Lucas, you said you didn't have any? Okay. So, Florian, you don't have any?
No.
Okay. Well, I guess we can close then. Thank you, everybody, for coming and listening to me rattle on for an hour. It was fun.
Thank you, Elin.
All right.